Greetings and welcome. We are Avoid Like Bruce. Welcome to our unique YouTube channel. Thank you for taking time to have a look at this, our latest video. We thought we'd already covered this subject, the wisdom of Bruce Lee, but that was a completely different video. So we'll come across this book, The Wisdom of Bruce Lee, a revolutionary spirit in the ancient fighting arts, written by authors Felix and Roger Hutchinson. It's quite an old book, it's quite tatty etc. inside. They may have spilled a drink or two on it. First we're going to have a look at who Felix was. Born May 1947 in May, died June 22nd 2014. He was an English publisher, poet, spoken word performer and philanthropist. His company, Dennis Publishing, pioneered computer and hobbyist magazine publishing in the United Kingdom. In more recent times, the company added lifestyle titles such as its flagship brand, The Week, which is published in the UK and the United States. And here's the contents, his early life. He was obviously born in England somewhere. Kingston upon James, Surrey, and so forth. He states here, he was brought up in rather unusual circumstances. When he was 12, his father immigrated to Australia for reasons he's never wanted to know. His mother didn't follow him. Eventually they got divorced, which was incredibly unusual at that time. So he was brought up by a very strong woman who set out to prove that her early failure, which is how she must have seen it, was not to blight her children's lives. She went to night school, trained as a chartered accountant, and turned us middle class. Meanwhile, he was the alpha male in the family. When he was about 14, his mother remarried a gentle giant. He was a wonderful man, but for Dennis, he was a second alpha male in the house, and that meant he left home very early. He moved into his first bedsit, and so forth. Played in R&B bands and more. In 1967, Dennis began selling copies of the Counterculture Oz magazine on the street of London's King's Road. Later, Dennis became a designer and worked with John Goodchild, the magazine's art director. In 1969, Dennis wrote a world exclusive for Oz, etc., etc., the first ever review of Led Zeppelin's debut album, and so forth. John Lennon recorded the single God Save Oz, Do the Oz, to raise money for a legal defence fund. And he did underground comics, computer magazines. With the rising popularity of martial arts with the film Enter the Dragon, Dennis's Kung Fu Monthly became a success just 2 years after the Oz trial, making over £60,000 in the first year. Well, we did a video on that, a free monthly magazine called Kung Fu Monthly, which was well liked. And he was the second publisher of Personal Computer World. He later sold to VNU, and so forth. In 1995, Dennis publishing created Maxim, a title that began on the back of a beer mat and became the world's biggest selling men's lifestyle magazine and global brand. In 1966, Dennis acquired a majority stake in what is now Dennis Publishing flagship brand, The Week, etc., etc. And there's more information here on him. Dennis was credited with having been the first person to say the C word that rhymes with hunt or grunt on live British television on November 7, 1970. Dennis was interviewed by Melvin Bragg and Southbank Show, etc., etc. So I'm going to go to the book Wisdom of Bruce Lee by Felix. Have a look inside here. Bruce Lee in his own words. Bruce Lee was a man of action, rarely in one human being has such speed, strength and skill being developed to such a high degree and excellence, but he was also a man of great depth and sensitivity. Between the sweet and the pain, the work and the fame, he always found a way to express some profound ideas in but a few words. Man, because he is a creative individual, is far more important than any style or system. Life is a constant process of relating. Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. A goal is not always meant to be reached. It often serves simply as something to aim at, and so forth. contents page. Chapter 1, The Fighting Mind, the Philosophy of Kung Fu. The Fighting Mind, the Philosophy of Kung Fu. A Kung Fu man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing and it refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. Let the mind think what it likes without interference by the separate thinker or ego within oneself. So long as it thinks what it wants, there is absolutely no effort in letting it go. And the disappearance of the effort to let it go is precisely the disappearance of the separate thinker. Bruce Lee. There is a form of Chinese verse and philosophical truism whose sole basis is the description of one or more facets of the superior man. Thus Confucius was led to write, if the superior man abandons virtue, how can he fulfill the requirements of that name? The equally respected Lao Tzu commented that the superior man anticipates tasks that are difficult while they are still easy, and does things that would become great while they are small. Therefore the superior man, while he never does what is great, is able on that account to accomplish the greatest of things. If all of these statements and snippets were amalgamated, and if some human creature found himself capable of fulfilling each and every one of them, then the result would not only be a paragon of every human virtue, it would also be a walking definition of the term Kung Fu, which means hard work. It is Westerners who have been guilty of bastardizing the meaning of Kung Fu, adopting it as a phrase like karate, meaning simply some deadly form of fighting skill. Nothing could be further from the truth. Kung Fu, according to its original Chinese translation, is an accomplishment, a skill, a perfection of one or many arts. A master of Kung Fu would be well versed in philosophy, an able alchemist, knowledgeable in practical medicine, an entertaining musician, thoroughly read in verse and prose, and finally able to defend himself and others against attack. To view his accomplishment in the martial arts as a paramount is to mistake the purpose of his calling, and to see the nature of Kung Fu as in a false light. But man is an aggressive, violent animal, impressed more by strength of body and speed of limb than by some pithy muse. Perhaps it was inevitable that the martial facet of Kung Fu should come to eclipse the rest. Legend and myth have added their weight to this process. Even today, the Kung Fu Sifu of ancient China is portrayed in contemporary books and stories as a symbol of native insurrection against oppression, a kind of Asian Robin Hood, and so forth. When Bruce Lee said that the martial arts are about self-knowledge, he was echoing the comment of Lao Tzu that a skillful warrior strikes a decisive blow and stops. He does not continue his attack to assert his mastery. He will strike the blow, but be on his guard against being vain or arrogant over his success. He strikes it as a matter of necessity, but not from a wish of mastery. In other words, the qualities necessary to perfect the art of Kung Fu include humility, restraint, and all of those virtues that culture teaches. Without such virtues, it is not possible to become a competent martial artist. Indeed, students from the Shaolin Temple were not allowed to leave the monastery until they had passed a series of tests designed to assess their various qualities, from questions of philosophy and history to the more strenuous running the gauntlet of more than 100 armed and mechanized dummies, and the celebrated final test of endurance, the lifting of a red-hot heavy metal urn away from the exit. One pupil actually did succeed in leaving the monastery without passing these last two tests. Hu Wei Chuan escaped through the sewers after 15 years, and we should be glad that he did, for after the Manchus had destroyed the Shaolin temples, Hu Wei Chuan was one of the few survivors able to pass on the secrets of his teachings, and so forth. And there's some suggestions here. Exercise mind-wise, breathing-wise probably. We're not really interested about anyone else, we just look at basically what Bruce Lee, what's mentioned about Bruce Lee in this particular book. In the only book he ever wrote, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, Lee made it clear that his road was not the easiest of ways. It is a trite assumption commonly held that the stripping down of styles into one effective form, which is the essence of Jeet Kune Do, or Jeet Kune Do, might somehow be a quicker, painless way of accumulating fighting skills. In fact, Lee points out a formless form is the most elevated state, and can only be achieved after mastery of a number of those minor forms which once were an end in themselves. On top of this, Jeet Kune Do requires of its practitioners something which Lee feared was disappearing fast from the fighting arts: initiative, the ability to adapt to the unexpected, rather than simply work out with a time-worn and tired kata. Lee was opposed, as were the old masters, to any frivolous idea of kung fu as a sport or a game. It was a way of life or it was nothing. He believed, again as did the old masters, that man was inherently weak in mind and pure at heart, and that pursuit of the martial arts could strengthen the former and emphasize the latter. But there were aspects of the martial arts and their traditional philosophies that made Lee uneasy. He once described himself as mid-Pacific man, and this combination of Chinese and American culture brought about complications in him. This is probably clearest in his attitude towards Buddhism. Skepticism toward organized religion that America taught him bounced sharply back off his Eastern education. It was a complication that he seemed never to resolve. On the one hand, he was capable of pointing out the eightfold path of Buddha toward full knowledge and understanding of life, and on the other hand, he could scathingly reject such mystical religious notions. Part of him saw religion as a manifestation of man's desire to shrug the responsibility for his own life off onto some nebulous force beyond man's control, as a weakness, and Lee despised weakness. And another part of him whispered that the great visions and truths of religious men were not to be lightly rejected, but were rather to be studied and absorbed, to be used selectively in the formation of man's character, in the same way that the useful parts of other styles were accommodated in Jeet Kune Do. Essentially, Lee was a pragmatist. He believed in making efficient use of the resources available to him, and therein lies the secret of his unique contribution to the martial arts philosophies. In less than a decade, he stripped away centuries of obfuscation in a practical, straightforward manner, and so forth. There are those who regret the influence that Bruce Lee has had on the martial arts, who would claim that what seems to be a revitalizing and updating of an art form has actually corrupted it beyond repair. And there are those who would argue that Lee's was a false revolution, and exercise in publicity and the accumulation of fame and money, saying it's all Hollywood, that he couldn't beat anyone, he couldn't fight, all that sort of stuff, he's just an actor, and money rather than a necessary review of the meaning of the martial arts. Lee, the pragmatist, knew about such criticism and really directly argued with it. His power and almost paranormal grace answered for him. Had he wished, however, Lee might have spoken of his effect on the martial arts in the words of Wu Di, who, while an emperor of the Liang dynasty in ancient China, wrote a poem entitled The Liberator. And there's the poem there. The netting of the old martial arts philosophies has been slashed beyond repair, and more people seem inclined to thank Bruce Lee for it than to criticise him. Chapter 2, The Martial Arts Establishment, the Classical Mess. True Kung Fu is rooted in the feet. It develops in the legs, is directed by the waist, and functions through the fingers. Chang San Feng. It seems unusual for a movie star actually to be competent in the art that he popularizes on the screen. Lee's knowledge of the subject was devastating. A whole room in his house was dedicated to books on the martial arts, reputedly the biggest fight library in the world. Senator John Tunney, son of the famous boxer Gene Tunney, was having dinner with Lee one evening when Lee mentioned that he had read 2 books on fighting that Gene had written. John Tunney was astonished. He has never before or since met anybody who even knew that his father had written those books. As a kid in Hong Kong, Lee recalled, I was a punk and went looking for fights. We used chains and pins with knives hidden inside. Then one day I wondered what would happen if I didn't have my gang behind me when I got into a fight. I decided to learn how to protect myself, and I began to study Kung Fu. From the very beginning of that training, Lee would have been made to realize that he was entering a calling with a long, distinguished and well-recorded tradition, and so forth. He threw himself into studying the martial arts at the Wing Chun School under a respected master, Ip Man, whose individual attention Lee valued so much that he would stand outside the school before lessons, waving the other students away, saying, "No class today." He was studying Wing Chun because he felt it to be the most valuable Kung Fu style. He had mixed memories of the school. I have to give the Japanese credit for installing regimentation in their schools. The Japanese sensei teacher is revered, and his command is law, but not the Sifu Kung Fu teacher. We used to address our Sifu with, "Hey old man, what do you want? What do you have in mind for us to do?" If we didn't like what he wanted us to do, we used to say, "God damn it, we have to do that crap again." Many of Lee's fellow punks dropped out. They didn't take Kung Fu for health reasons, but just to learn to fight. He later sanctimonious decided, but Lee remains to share the thrills of battles between schools. Like the old tradition, one school would challenge another, just like you see in those old chop-sucky movies. He related, and a designated place and time would be set, and so forth. Professor Yip, head of Wing Chun School, would come up to Lee, instructing him to relax and calm his mind. "Forget about yourself and follow the opponent's movement," he would say. "Let your mind do the counter movement without deliberation. Learn the art of detachment." That was the secret to relax, but when Lee learned he must relax, he was immediately up against the contradiction. The effort in must was inconsistent with the effortlessness of relax. When Lee's self-consciousness grew to frustrating proportions, his instructor again approached him and said, "Lee, follow nature and don't interfere. Never assert yourself against nature. Never be in opposition to any problem, but swing with it. Don't practice this week, go home and think." Lee stayed home the following week. After many hours of meditation, he gave up and decided to go sailing alone in a junk. At sea, the thought of his training made him mad at himself, and he punched at the water. At that moment, the thought suddenly struck him that water, this very basic stuff, was the essence of Kung Fu. Didn't it illustrate the principle of Kung Fu? One could strike water, but it did not suffer damage. One could stab it, yet it would not be wounded. To grasp a handful of it was impossible. Water could fit into any shape of container, and although it seemed weak, it could eventually penetrate any substance in the world. The nature of water, that was what Lee discovered as a guiding principle. Still savouring this experience, Lee continued to gaze into the water when suddenly a bird flew over, casting a reflection. Another hidden meaning seemed clarified. Shouldn't the thoughts and emotions that he had in front of an opponent pass like the reflection of a bird over the water? Lee felt that this was what Professor Yip meant by being detached, to accept by going with and not against one's nature. Lee lay on the boat, feeling that he had united with Tao, or the way, had become one with nature. Letting the boat drift freely, Lee just lay there enjoying a state of inner feeling in which opposition had become mutually cooperative instead of mutually exclusive, in which there was no longer any conflict in his mind. Later, he was to apply the lesson learned by his experience on the junk to his own friends and students, having rationalized the state of Tao, or the way, and become convinced that technical knowledge of Kung Fu did not make a man its master. The spirit of Kung Fu could be grasped only when a man's mind was in harmony with the principle of life itself. That is, when he attained a state known in Taoism as no-mindedness. This consists in preserving absolute fluidity of the mind, keeping it free from all intellectual considerations and effective disturbances. According to Lee's belief, everybody can think himself into his goal if he mixes his thoughts with persistence, definition of purpose, and an intense desire for its translation into reality. By this time, Lee had decided what kind of a man he wanted to be. Given his training and upbringing, it cannot have been too difficult a decision. Lee felt that a Kung Fu man lives without being dependent on the opinion of others, and that a Kung Fu master, unlike the beginner, holds himself in reserve. He is quiet and unassuming, with no desire to show off. Kung Fu training creates a proficiency that becomes spiritual. The master is made freer through spiritual struggle. Fame and status means nothing to him. These ideas showed the gentle, humble influence of old Professor Ip, or Ip Man, but it was an influence that Lee came largely to reject as his self-confidence and knowledge increased. And there's more information on how Bruce Lee thought in regards to the martial arts, the current martial arts of his day, the classical mess. And he quoted here, putting it bluntly, 99% of the whole business of Oriental self-defense is baloney. It's fancy jazz, it looks good but it doesn't work. If a 90-pound woman is attacked by a 250-pound man, the only thing she can do is strike hard at one of the three places, the eyeballs, the groin or the shins. This should be sufficient to put the man off balance for just a moment, and then she'd better run like hell. Lee thought that breaking bricks and boards with the edge of your hand was irrelevant, a gimmick. Martial arts are about self-defense, and a brick or board would never instigate a fight. Similarly, other karate disciplines were more a hindrance than a help, because while you remembered what you'd been taught to do in a situation, your opponent could kill you, which is exactly what you should trying to do to him. According to Lee, the majority of martial arts students were there only out of vanity. It is exotic. They figure they'll learn how to live a beautiful life through Zen and meditation. But Lee felt that if you want something beautiful, you should take up modern dancing. What good is it for a boxer to learn to meditate? He's a fighter, not a monk. Besides, it's all too ritualistic. That sort of Oriental self-defense is like swimming on land, Lee said. You can learn the strokes, but if you're never in the water, it's nonsense. He even turned his wit against that most honoured of martial arts totems, the belt system of grading ability. Asked what colour belt he himself owned, he replied, I don't have any belt whatsoever. That is just a certificate. Unless you can really do it, that belt doesn't mean anything. I think it might be useful to hold your pants up, but that's about all. The final insult is specifically designed to remove himself finally and irrevocably from the martial arts establishment, was a small tombstone near the front door of his own school. Inscribed on it were the words, in memory of a once fluid man, crammed and distorted by the classical mess. That, Lee told Black Belt magazine, expressed his feelings perfectly. There is evidence, however, that Lee was not as hysterical. Lee opposed to the classical arts as he'd like people to think. He undoubtedly owed much of his own discipline and ability to classical training, and it would be unlike him to forget that. His love of playing devil's advocate in the stuffy, confined atmosphere of the ancient martial arts chambers led him to berate and exaggerate, to attempt to inject some life and necessary changes into his first love, the martial arts. By martial art, I mean an unrestricted athletic expression of an individual soul. Martial art also means daily, hermit-like physical training to upgrade or maintain one's quality. To live is to express oneself freely in creation. Creation, I must say, or Bruce must say, at that time, is not a fixed something or a solidification. And he hoped that his fellow martial artists would open up and be transparently real, and he wished them well in their own process of finding their cause. He told a Hong Kong interviewer once, bringing the problem back home, there's boxing which uses hands and judo which is throwing. He wasn't putting them down, mind you, but he was saying that this is a bad thing because of styles. People are separated. They are not united together because styles become law, man. The original founder of the style started out with a hypothesis, but now it has become the gospel truth, and people who go into that become the product of it. Don't most people do that with everything? From evolution to religion and so forth. It doesn't matter who you are, how you are structured, how you are built, how you are made. It doesn't seem to matter. You just go in there and become that product. And to Bruce, that wasn't right. Chapter 3, Not One But All. Jeet Kune Do was born. That's a pretty old book. Like it must have got wet or something like that. Okay, and it talks about Jeet Kune Do. Philosophies of a philosophical quote from Lao Tzu. Okay, on Hong Kong television, someone challenged him and he stood up. Well, this old guy stood up and he taunted them. This guy was taunting him, right? So he got up and he walked over to this guy who said, "I'll come over and try to push him." You know, it was Tai Chi stance or Chi power stance or whatever. So Lee got up to his feet and walked slowly over. He looked the man up and down and punched him hard in the face, knocking him out of his stance and flat onto his back. There was an uproar in the studio. An outraged classical master seized Lee by the arm and demanded to know why he'd done such a thing. Lee shrugged. "I don't push," he said, "I punch." So this person that sent us a comment and says, "Oh, you know, Bruce Lee's all Hollywood. He's an actor. He couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag," or that sort of stuff. Well, you're incorrect, because here's the evidence here. Right, a friend of Lee's, Adrian Marshall, tells the following story about sparring with him. Bruce tied him up like a pretzel so that he couldn't move. He stood there totally frustrated. Whatever he tried, Bruce could counter it with ease. "Try something else," commanded Bruce. "What?" he shouted angrily. "What can I do?" "You could always bite," laughed Bruce. But he meant it. In one of his films, the villain ties him up in a wrestling hold. So what does he do? He bites. These two tales speak volumes about Bruce Lee's philosophy of the martial arts and about the style which he named Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do was a style that was not a style, a discipline that owed everything to the classical styles and owed them nothing. Jeet Kune Do in Lee's mind was about directness and about winning fights by any means necessary. And he goes into depth to explain Jeet Kune Do, the difference between the classical way, traditional way, and the Jeet Kune Do way, which is more effective. Goes into depth about Jeet Kune Do. Chapter 4, a finger pointing at the moon, on training and keeping fit. If you want to know more and how to do that, it's all here in this particular book. We'll leave the link below this video. We hope you enjoyed what we brought to you. If you did, please sign up to subscribe to our channel. Give us a like, add your comments below, and we'll get back to you on those as soon as we can. Then go share this video if you're a hardcore Bruce Lee fan, and they are also. They'd love to know about this video, so go share it with all your family, friends, neighbours, etc.